Robin Hood, Men in Tights was never just a silly parody with bad accents and cheap jokes. It was a direct ambush on Hollywood's obsession with taking itself too seriously. Beneath the slapstick, the songs, and the tights, the movie was barely holding together, pushed forward by stubborn creative choices, last-minute decisions, and a refusal to play by the rules. What looked like chaos on screen was actually calculated rebellion. And behind every punchline was a story that almost didn't survive the process. These are the real stories hidden behind the jokes, the costumes, and the laughter. Number 1. Sometimes the spark for a movie doesn't come from a studio meeting or a polished script. In this case, it came from pure frustration. The idea for Robin Hood, Men in Tights, was triggered by a teenager who was genuinely angry after watching a very serious Robin Hood movie. He hated the tone, hated the lack of humor, and especially hated the fake seriousness paired with an American accent. That frustration was passed along casually, almost as a complaint, but it landed at exactly the right moment. Mel Brooks recognized it instantly. What sounded like a teenage rant was actually a perfect reflection of how many people felt but hadn't said out loud. That reaction confirmed there was room and demand for a parody that didn't just joke about Robin Hood, but openly mocked the idea that the legend needed to be treated with dignity. The movie didn't start as a business decision. It started as a response, a reaction, and that reaction became the foundation for everything that followed. Number 2. Even though the movie looked chaotic on screen, the preparation behind it was anything but sloppy. To properly parody classic sword-fighting adventures, the cast had to first learn how those films were made. That meant real training, not exaggerated mockery. Instead of relying on stunt doubles or loose choreography, the actors were put through serious swordplay rehearsals. Timing mattered, footwork mattered, precision mattered. The comedy depended on getting the mechanics right before bending them for laughs. Cary Elwes already had fencing experience, but many of the others were starting from zero. They trained until movements became muscle memory, because parody only works when it's built on authenticity. The joke wasn't that they couldn't fight. The joke was that they could fight perfectly, then chose to make it ridiculous. That contrast is what gave the humor its sharp edge. Without the discipline behind the scenes, the comedy would have collapsed into noise. Instead, every swing, stumble, and pause was deliberate. Number 3. By the time the project appeared, Cary Elwes was in an uncomfortable position. Audiences still remembered him as a heroic swordsman, but Hollywood had quietly stopped calling. Offers were thinner, roles less inspired, and momentum had slowed. Then, one phone call changed everything. When the voice on the line introduced itself as Mel Brooks, Elwes assumed it was a joke and hung up. It sounded too absurd to be real. Moments later, the phone rang again. This time, it was unmistakable. The offer was genuine. Brooks wasn't just casting a lead, he was reclaiming Elwes's image and turning it inside out. He understood that Elwes could play a hero straight while delivering absurdity with restraint. That balance was essential. Robin Hood in this version couldn't be a clown. He had to look capable, confident, and sincere, even as the world around him unraveled. Brooks saw that immediately. What seemed like a prank at first became the defining role of Elwes's comedic legacy, not by abandoning his heroic image, but by weaponizing it. Number 4. At the time, Dave Chappelle was not a movie star, and he wasn't trying to be one. He was a young stand-up comic, sharp, unfiltered, and largely unknown outside comedy clubs. His audition didn't follow Hollywood rules. It wasn't polished. It wasn't safe, but it was honest. When Mel Brooks watched the tape, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for callbacks or revisions. He recognized instinctively that Chappelle brought something the film needed: unpredictability. Casting him wasn't about name value. It was about rhythm. On set, Chappelle wasn't treated like a newcomer. He was allowed to improvise, react, and push scenes in directions that weren't planned. That freedom mattered. The role became his first real step into film, not because it showcased range, but because it revealed presence. In a movie filled with exaggerated characters, his performance stood out by feeling real, even when everything else was deliberately absurd. It wasn't a breakout yet, but it was the spark, the kind that only becomes obvious years later. Number 5. For a brief moment, the role of Little John was heading in a completely different direction. The idea on the table wasn't subtle, and it wasn't ironic. It was massive. Hulk Hogan was seriously considered for the part. At the time, his presence dominated pop culture. Muscles, catchphrases, volume. On paper, it sounded like an easy joke. Put the biggest man in the room into a medieval forest and let the contrast do the work. But Mel Brooks hesitated. The problem wasn't size, it was tone. The character needed warmth, timing, and a kind of gentle absurdity. Not noise, not spectacle. Hogan's energy would have overwhelmed the joke instead of serving it, so the idea was quietly dropped. What remained was an important lesson that shaped the film's casting philosophy. Parody wasn't about stacking punchlines on top of fame, it was about choosing performers who understood restraint. The joke worked better when the actor didn't announce it before speaking. Sometimes, the smartest move is walking away from the loudest option. Number 6. Some roles were written with very specific voices in mind, and this one almost went to a familiar face from Mel Brooks's past. The part of Latrine was originally considered for a longtime collaborator whose style matched the character's bizarre energy perfectly. The chemistry was already there, the tone was understood, but negotiations stalled, not over creative differences, just practical ones. The deal didn't close, and the reunion quietly dissolved without headlines or drama. The role was passed to someone else, who reshaped it in a different direction while keeping the chaos intact. What's interesting isn't the loss, but how little the film depended on nostalgia casting. Brooks was loyal, but not sentimental to the point of compromise. The movie moved forward without pausing to mourn what might have been. That decision reinforced a pattern seen throughout the production. No role was protected by history. If something didn't fit in the moment, it was replaced. The joke always came first. Number 7. The forest itself carried more history than most people realized. The production returned to Lake Sherwood, a location already woven into Hollywood's memory. Decades earlier, the same landscape had hosted one of the most iconic Robin Hood films of the classic era. This wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't convenience. It was intentional. By bringing the parody back to the original ground, the film quietly linked itself to the very tradition it was mocking. The joke worked on 2 levels. On the surface, it was slapstick chaos in tights. Underneath, it was a respectful nod to the cinematic past. The same hills that once framed heroic sincerity now framed absurdity. That contrast was the point. Mel Brooks wasn't rejecting film history. He was engaging with it, using familiarity as a foundation before twisting expectations. The parody landed harder because it stood on the same soil as the legend it dismantled. Number 8. Mel Brooks never believed in subtle villains. When it came time to name the sheriff, restraint was never an option. The name wasn't designed to sound medieval or elegant. It was designed to sound wrong, deliberately crude. A wordplay that reduced authority to something rotten and ridiculous before the character ever spoke. That choice set the tone immediately. The sheriff wasn't meant to be feared. He was meant to expose how easily power becomes absurd when stripped of dignity. Every shriek, every exaggerated movement, every public humiliation followed that logic. The character didn't just lose, he unraveled. In a Brooks film, villains don't fall from grace quietly. They collapse loudly, dragged down by their own excess. The name itself was the first punchline, signaling that this movie had no interest in respecting figures that demanded respect without earning it. Number 9. Some jokes were designed to slip past unnoticed, rewarding only the most attentive viewers. One of the strangest examples was a small detail that kept changing without explanation. A physical feature that appeared on one side of a character's face in one scene, then quietly migrated to the other in the next. There was no dialogue calling attention to it, no reaction shots, no justification. That was intentional. The gag wasn't about realism. It was about unsettling the viewer just enough to make them question what they were seeing. This kind of humor had a lineage. Mel Brooks had used the same trick before, trusting the audience to either catch it or feel slightly disturbed without knowing why. It was comedy that refused to explain itself. If you noticed it, you were in on the joke. If you didn't, the movie moved on without you. That confidence defined the film's humor. Nothing waited for permission to be funny. Number 10. Not every memorable moment was written on the page. Some of the film's sharpest laughs came from instinct. During one scene, chaos erupts as a character's home is violently damaged, the kind of exaggerated destruction the movie thrived on. In the middle of it, an unexpected line slipped out. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed, it was a reflex. The absurd politeness of the response, delivered at the worst possible moment, caught everyone off guard. The set broke, the crew laughed. Even Mel Brooks had to step away, but no one stopped the camera. That reaction told him everything he needed to know. The line stayed. It worked because it felt human inside a ridiculous situation. It wasn't trying to be clever. It was honest, misplaced gratitude in the middle of nonsense. Moments like that reinforced a quiet rule on set. If something was genuinely funny, it didn't matter where it came from. The script was flexible, the joke was sacred. Number 11. Some effects looked elaborate but were deliberately simple. When the film needed a moment that felt supernatural, it didn't reach for technology or illusion. It reached for timing. A small prop, something ordinary, was used to sell a moment that should not have worked at all. There were no wires, no lights, no tricks designed to impress. The humor came from how little effort was involved. The scene succeeded because it openly refused to take itself seriously. Instead of hiding the cheapness, it leaned into it. That choice reflected the larger philosophy behind the movie. Spectacle wasn't the goal, commitment was. If the performers believed in the moment and delivered it with confidence, the audience would follow. The joke wasn't that the effect looked fake. The joke was that it didn't bother pretending to be real. Number 12. Mel Brooks never limited himself to directing from behind the camera. When he stepped into the film, it wasn't for a subtle cameo or a quick nod. It was a full commitment. His character was intentionally anachronistic, loud, and completely out of place, and that was the point. The performance didn't try to blend into the world of the movie. It disrupted it. Brooks used his presence to remind the audience who was in control of the chaos. The accent, the rhythm, the exaggerated delivery all carried his signature. This wasn't indulgence, it was authorship. By placing himself inside the film, Brooks reinforced the idea that the movie belonged to him, not the genre it was parodying. His appearance acted like a stamp, unmistakable and unapologetic. The joke wasn't just what the character said. The joke was that the character existed at all. Number 13. One line managed to do what entire scenes couldn't. It took aim at a cultural complaint everyone already knew. When Robin directly acknowledges his ability to speak with a proper English accent, the joke lands instantly because it isn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. The reference was clear, deliberate, and sharp. A previous Robin Hood had played the role without even attempting authenticity, and audiences noticed, critics noticed, Mel Brooks noticed. This moment wasn't just parody. It was correction through comedy. The line worked because it was true, and truth made it sting. Cary Elwes delivered it without exaggeration, which made it even stronger. He didn't wink, he didn't pause, he simply stated it and moved on. The film trusted the audience to connect the dots. That confidence turned a throwaway gag into one of the most quoted lines in the entire movie. Number 14. Some jokes didn't rely on dialogue at all. They lived entirely in names, references, and cultural memory. One supporting character carried a name that sounded excessive on purpose, blending two completely different cinematic worlds into a single identity. It wasn't explained. It didn't need to be. The humor worked instantly for anyone who recognized it and silently passed by those who didn't. That was intentional. Mel Brooks trusted his audience to either catch the reference or miss it without slowing the film down. The name wasn't just a gag. It was a compression of genres, eras, and tones, collapsing classic Hollywood drama into medieval absurdity. The character didn't parody a person, he parodied cinematic excess itself. In one exaggerated personality, the film managed to poke fun at melodrama, vanity, and overacting, all without breaking pace or calling attention to the joke. Number 15. Long before this film, Mel Brooks had already decided that comedy worked better when it moved to music. He didn't treat songs as decoration or filler. For him, they were structure, rhythm, sharpened jokes. Melody made absurdity stick. Every musical moment in the film followed that belief. None of the songs were outsourced or treated casually. They were written with the same precision as dialogue, designed to escalate humor rather than pause it. The lyrics weren't clever by accident. They were crafted to sound ridiculous while being technically tight. This approach confused some people at the time, especially those who thought parody should move fast and stay quiet. Brooks disagreed. He believed that when comedy sang, it committed fully to its own nonsense. The songs didn't interrupt the film, they revealed its philosophy. This wasn't a parody, embarrassed by its excess. It leaned into it, proudly, loudly, and without apology. Number 16. The casting of Friar Tuck was not accidental, and it wasn't simply about familiarity. Mel Brooks had worked with this actor years earlier on a short-lived television parody that already played with the Robin Hood myth. Bringing him back wasn't nostalgia for its own sake. It was continuity, a quiet thread connecting two eras of Brooks's comedy. The performance carried the weight of that history, even if most viewers never consciously noticed it. This was Brooks building his own internal mythology where jokes echoed across decades. The character felt older, slightly confused, but still perfectly tuned to the absurdity around him. That choice reinforced something important about the film. Men in Tights wasn't created in isolation. It was part of a long-running conversation Brooks had been having with the legend for years. The joke had history, and that history made it sharper. Number 17. The film didn't just break the fourth wall, it erased it completely. Characters acknowledged cameras, scripts, props, and exits without hesitation. These moments weren't accidents or improvisational chaos, they were deliberate signals. The movie was never pretending to be immersive. It was inviting the audience into the mechanics of the joke. When the illusion collapsed, it did so openly, almost proudly. This approach turned the viewer into a participant rather than a passive observer. The humor came from transparency. By exposing the machinery of filmmaking, the movie removed any pressure to suspend disbelief. Nothing had to feel real. It only had to feel intentional. That attitude separated the film from standard parody. It wasn't mocking the genre from the outside. It was standing inside it, tearing down the walls, and laughing while doing it. Number 18. Not everyone believed the film's approach would work. During production, pressure came from outside voices who felt the movie was going too far, especially with its musical numbers. The argument was simple. The songs were too much, too frequent, too ridiculous. The suggestion was to cut them down or remove them entirely. Mel Brooks refused. For him, the music wasn't optional. It was structural. Removing it would have stripped the film of its identity. He understood that parody without commitment collapses into hesitation. The songs weren't distractions, they were declarations. Each one pushed the absurdity further, locking jokes into memory through repetition and rhythm. By standing his ground, Brooks protected the film's core. What might have looked excessive to executives became the heartbeat of the movie. Without the music, the parody would have softened. With it, the film doubled down and never looked back. Number 19. Years after the film's release, its impact became clearer through an unexpected measure. When fans recognized the lead actor, they didn't mention his dramatic roles or earlier heroic performances. They quoted lines, they reenacted scenes, they remembered the jokes. The character had outgrown the movie itself. What made that lasting connection unusual was how deliberately ridiculous the role had been. The performance walked a narrow line between sincerity and mockery, and it never broke character, even when the world around it collapsed into nonsense. That balance gave the role durability. It wasn't trying to be iconic. It became iconic because it respected the audience enough to play everything straight. Comedy faded around it, but the character stayed. Over time, that version of the legend didn't replace the original. It joined it, and for many viewers, it became the one they remembered most. Number 20. When the movie was released, it didn't arrive with prestige or critical enthusiasm. The response was restrained, and the box office numbers were solid but unremarkable by blockbuster standards. Many critics dismissed it as too broad, too childish, or too ridiculous to matter. What they missed was how little the film cared about approval. The audience response followed a different path. The movie lived on through rewatches, quotes, shared jokes, and worn-out tapes passed between friends. Over time, repetition did what reviews couldn't. It turned familiarity into affection. The film didn't survive because it was defended. It survived because it was enjoyed. Years later, it stood not as a misunderstood failure, but as a quiet victory. A reminder that comedy doesn't need validation to endure. It only needs people willing to laugh and remember. What made this film last was never its budget, its timing, or critical approval. It lasted because it never asked to be taken seriously. Instead, it challenged the idea that seriousness was required at all. The movie understood something simple and dangerous. Legends don't survive because they're protected. They survive because they're retold, reshaped, and sometimes mocked without mercy. By refusing to treat the myth with reverence, the film kept it alive. Every joke was a rejection of false dignity. Every broken rule was intentional. This wasn't parody trying to be clever. It was comedy acting with confidence. And decades later, that confidence is still visible. The laughter didn't fade because it was honest. It didn't need permission. It only needed timing. The title itself was never innocent. Say it slowly, and the joke reveals itself. That double meaning wasn't hidden by accident. It summed up the entire film in a single phrase. Heroism stripped of bravado, masculinity punctured by fabric and song. In a world obsessed with strength and seriousness, the movie chose embarrassment as its sharpest weapon. That choice defined everything that followed. It didn't just parody a legend, it undressed it, handed it back to the audience, and trusted them to laugh. And sometimes, that's how stories survive the longest.